One of the keys to any good story is the characters that make it, and for them there is little to no room for stagnation. Whether a protagonist or an antagonist, there simply has to be an evolution, or a journey that brings them to the conclusion of their arc, a changed person. This could be something utterly life-changing, like how Tony Stark went from playboy to Earth's best defender, or other times filmmakers will resist the temptation to draw attention and leave him in the background for the eagle-eyed to notice. So with that being said, I'm Jem from WhatCulture.com, and here are 10 subtle signs movie characters were getting smarter. Number 10. Legolas learned from the cave troll, The Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King. It goes without saying that in The Lord of the Rings, although Frodo was the sole ring bearer, he wouldn't have been able to get anywhere close to the fires of Mount Doom if it weren't for the help of the Fellowship of the Ring. Among his 8 companions were great warriors, and they helped carve the path to Mordor. None they had encountered such a beast earlier in their journey. There was even a little healthy competition between Legolas and Gimli as to who could kill the most orcs, Uruk-hai, and enemies in general. When the former took down a hulking elephant, the latter was quick to point out that it still only counted as 1 kill, and it may have been none had they encountered such a beast earlier in their journey. As the company were forced through the mines of Moria, they were attacked by orcs and more than 1 cave troll. During the fight, Legolas climbed to the top of one of the beast's shoulders to shoot an arrow through its skull, but his weapon merely deflected away. Fast forward to near the end of their journey as Legolas found himself with the task of bringing down an elephant at least 10 times bigger than the troll. Learning from his fight of the mines of Moria, Legolas still climbs up towards the head, but instead of aiming at the top of the skull, he fired his bow into its base, and instead of using just 1 arrow, fired 3 to be certain. Number 9. Simba learned Nala's moves in The Lion King. Though he couldn't wait to be king when he was just a small cub, after the death of his father and his exile, Simba wanted nothing less than to be the ruler of the Pride Lands. However, it was his fate that he was dragged back into the life he would have had all along if it was not for his uncle Scar. Ironically, Simba went from wanting a simple life as an unknown vagabond with Timon and Pumbaa to fighting tooth and nail for the crown. And thanks to his relationship with Nala, he was able to win. When Simba and his betrothed wrestled when they were mere cubs, Nala beat him. The same thing happened when the two first came together again after so many years apart. Both times she employed the same move, using Simba's momentum against him as he leapt at her to flip him over and pin him to the ground. Being on the receiving end of such a beating on multiple occasions seemingly stuck with the future king, as when it came time to truly fight, it was he who pulled out the same move to send Scar reeling over the edge of the cliff when they fought. Number 8. Ian Malcolm respected the T-Rex, The Lost World, Jurassic Park. When Richard Attenborough's John Hammond took a small group of experts to Isla Nublar in order to sign off the safety of Jurassic Park, there was a wide range of people taken. While Alan Grant and Ellie Sattler were experts in their respective dinosaur-related fields, Ian Malcolm was not. Jeff Goldblum's character was instead well versed in non-linear equations and patterns. He frequently told Hammond that Jurassic Park was a bad idea before, during, and after setting foot on the island, but still, he went and was almost killed for his trouble. When the guests were confronted by the big bad of the island, the T-Rex, Alan told Ian not to move as the beast's vision was based on movement. Trying to be a hero but royally messing things up, Malcolm baited the Rex into following him instead and wound up with a near fatal injury. Upon being forced into a rescue mission on Isla Sorna's Site B years later in the events of the Lost World Jurassic Park, Ian was of course the only person on the island with experience of these dinosaurs close up. Whereas he knew nothing about them before, it was now he who was having to tell everyone else to freeze in the presence of the greatest predator who ever lived. He certainly was not about to run from it again. Number 7. Qui-Gon Jinn Tricked Watto in Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace. Most famously used by Obi-Wan Kenobi to tell a stormtrooper that C-3PO and R2-D2 weren't the droids they were looking for, the Jedi mind trick is something that really could have been utilised a lot more. Instead of risky and potentially fatal fights, why not just politely tell the enemy to stop? Perhaps it's because the mind trick doesn't work on everyone. When Qui-Gon Jinn tried to manipulate Watto into accepting his Republic credits, the latter explained that he was a Toydarian and such tricks did not work on him, meaning the Jedi Jedi was forced to leave without getting what he wanted. Sometime later, QuiGon needed to persuade the winged alien once again. Knowing that he couldn't simply control his mind by using the Force, Obi-Wan's master had to think a little harder and get a little more creative. He couldn't use his trick on Watto directly, but that didn't mean he couldn't manipulate the environment around him. When discussing their wager on Anakin's pod race, Qui-Gon wanted to free the young boy and his mother, though Watto was only willing to gamble one of them. He rolled a chance cube, and if it landed on blue, he would bet Anakin. Red, his mother. The Jedi was confused when his mind tricks didn't work on Watto, but instead found a different way to get what he wanted, and used the Force to ensure the dice landed on blue. Good idea. Number 6. Major William Cage protected himself in Edge of Tomorrow. Imagine being stuck in a Groundhog Day type situation in which you have to live a single day over and over again, only instead of being a weatherman in the case of Bill Murray, the day sees you thrust into a bloody war against a race of invading aliens you couldn't be less prepared for. Welcome to Edge of Tomorrow. After attempting to disobey a direct order to join the battlefield on the first wave as something of a publicity stunt, Tom Cruise's Major William Cage was forced into the combat jacket suit and sent to what should have been his death. He had absolutely no training and didn't even know how to turn the safety off his weapons, though he still managed to outlive the majority of the crew around him. Classic Tom Cruise. When he was inevitably killed in action, Cage was given a chance to relive the horrific day again, though still completely out of his depth. With only a few minutes of experience in the field under his belt, he began to learn immediately. The first time Cage fell from the chopper after it was attacked by the mimics, he fell flat on his face in the water and broke his face shield. The second time, however, he was more prepared, and though he still landed on his face, he was able to protect himself as so his shield remained intact. It's a tiny detail, but this was just the beginning of his education in how to survive. Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below, and while you're there, drop us a like, share and subscribe too. Number 5. The use of armor in Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes. A slightly different entry here, as this doesn't revolve around one single character, but rather an entire species. With many generations taking place in between the events of the War of the Planet of the Apes and Kingdom of the Planet of the Apes, there was always going to be a difference between the apes themselves. The big evolutionary difference so that the apes now live in true societies, with law, order and hierarchy, while the most obvious leap forward is their speech. The animals speak English almost fluently, while Caesar's grasp of the language was broken even at his best. The apes in Proximus Kingdom, however, have come further than others, as they are the first apes to protect themselves with armor. During Caesar's war, they were never able to shield their bodies against the rattle of the human guns, but that changed by the time Proximus ruled. According to the production designer for Kingdom, Daniel T. Torrance, the apes figured out that they were able to break apart pieces of the ship that was essentially the king's castle and use them to build weapons and armor. This is the kind of evolution similarly seen in the opening scenes of 2001: A Space Odyssey, with the apes learning to use tools and the environment around them, but at a wildly accelerated rate. Number 4. The family learned about the monsters. A Quiet Place. You could argue that when A Quiet Place's Lee and Evelyn Abbott, played by John Krasinski and Emily Blunt, decided to have a child in a world where there was even the slightest noise would see them killed by horrific monsters, they made one of the most questionable decisions possible, to put it lightly. However, they also deserve a spot on this list of characters who got smarter. The events of the opening scene took place on day 89 of the alien invasion, before a jump to day 472. Though they suffered the tragic loss of their youngest son, it was no accident that they then survived for as long as they did. They soundproofed walls, didn't wear shoes, left the crunchy foods on the shelves of the store, and even swapped out their Monopoly pieces for something quieter. They also researched the monsters themselves. On the family's whiteboard, they had written down numerous facts and questions about their hunters, including that they were blind, armored, and that they needed medical supplies. They were learning about the beasts, and according to the whiteboard, though they were initially thought to be 3 in the area, this was updated to 5. Who knows how exactly this research was conducted or confirmed, but it's a big reason as to how they were able to survive. Number 3. Brian Clough shifted his focus in The Damned United. There are few actors able to boast the sheer range that Michael Sheen can, brilliantly portraying drastically different characters across the likes of Frost Nixon, Good Omens, Underworld and more. However, arguably one of his best and most accurate roles came in the damned United. While manager of the Derby County, Sheen's Brian Clough was spurned by then Leeds United manager Don Revie, which kicked off a rivalry of sorts between the two. Perhaps not so much a rivalry, but a vengeance in Clough that wouldn't be satisfied until he beat the counterpart. At first he thought the key to this was to be a smart player and control the game, so he brought in Dave McKay. Derby subsequently lost 5-0 the next time they played Leeds. There was a conversation between Clough and his assistant manager Peter Taylor after the game in which they spoke about how their striker, John O'Hare, had been bullied. This was where Clough subtly seemed to pick up a new aspect that could improve the team rather than in midfield or defence. In the team talk before the next game against Leeds, the only game the manager cared about, Clough gave O'Hare special attention and had clearly been working with him in training. The result was that the striker scored both goals in a 2-1 win against the supposed best team in the country, as Clough learned from his mistakes and, after being embarrassed by Leeds, found a way to win next time. Number 2. Bella Baxter's evolving wardrobe in Poor Things. While almost every major film character will go through a change of sorts, a journey throughout the story that makes them different or a better person by the end, rarely is this evolution on the same level or quite so comprehensive as Bella's in Poor Things. Thanks to having the mind of her unborn baby transferred into her adult body in one of the more bizarre storylines you're likely to find on screen, Emma Stone's character went from playful infant to grown woman throughout the events of the film, her mind growing, expanding and learning just as a child's would. Not only could this growth be seen in how Stone portrayed the character, it was subtly signalled by her choice of clothing. Holly Waddington won the Oscar for Best Costume Designer for her work on the film, thanks in no small part to how her aesthetic choices reflected where Bella was in her development. In the beginning, the character's clothes reflected that of when a child is dressed by an adult, in that the ensemble doesn't usually stay together for too long. When she then heads out into the world with Duncan Wedderburn, played by Mark Ruffalo, it's the first time she's dressing herself, something Waddington compared to a child dressing up in grown-up clothes, for an undoubtedly sophisticated turn in style that follows the pattern of Bella's mind catching up to her adult body. And number 1. Jack listened to Mozart in The Incredibles. Throughout the first Incredibles movie, there was always a question mark hovering over little Jack. While Mr. Incredible, played by Craig T. Nelson, and Elastigirl, played by Holly Hunter's other two children, had powers, Dash, played by Spencer Fox, had super speed. Violet could turn invisible and manipulate energy, but Jack seemingly didn't. Edna Mode, played by Brad Bird, made a suit for the baby anyway, as she assumed he would have powers. And as it turned out, she was ultimately right. By the end of the movie, these abilities came through like no one could have ever imagined. Jack had just about everything you could hope for, and they kicked in at exactly the wrong time. While the family was away fighting Syndrome, Jack was left with Carrie, Brett Parker, the babysitter who Helen did not exactly have full faith in. However, who knows how long it would have taken for his powers to come if it's not for her. It may well have been her who triggered it. As she explained to Helen over the phone, Carrie was playing Mozart to Jack, as she'd heard that doing so made babies smarter. In the Pixar short Jack Attack, as soon as he heard the classical music, his powers kicked in. Carrie was ultimately right, as listening to the music worked and allowed Jack to begin to unlock his full potential.